Hello, everyone. My name is Paul. Welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone is having a fantastic day. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's a ton of stuff ongoing in the news today, as you can certainly tell from the map. We have stuff spanning all of the globe and covering a lot of different topics. But regardless of what we're talking about, usually what that means is a lot of human suffering for a lot of people. And unfortunately, that is something that's a very widespread issue throughout our world today, whether you're talking about as a result of conflict or climate change or natural disasters or what have you, political instability. There is a lot of people suffering. 345 million people are estimated currently require humanitarian aid throughout the world. It's the highest number that it has ever been since it's been recorded. And so the whole point of what we do here at the New News is to try and help as many people as possible while delivering you the news and letting you know what's happening throughout the world. That's why we're the news that gives back. We want to try and give back to the people that need it the most and that we're talking about in each and every single one of these news stories. Which is why, if you would like to give back to these people, to help these people, we have a ton of different organizational links in the description. 100% of everything we do here is going to be charity driven. We are not going to make a single cent off of what we do here at the New News. We want everything to go into helping people all throughout the world, which is why you'll never see any merchandising or monetization for personal gain or any of that kind of stuff. So please be sure to check out that video description. Check out all those organizations. They span the entire globe. 70% or more of the donations that those organizations receive go directly to their programs, meaning they go directly to helping people, with 3% or less going to things like salaries and administration's costs. And if you have more organizations, get in touch with a staff member. All of our information is listed on our website for getting in contact with staff members, as well as you going through the Discord. You can reach us there. Show us a link in a short description of what that organization does, and we'll get it added to our vetting list. And hopefully, if it passes that vetting process, goes to our it will end up reaching the streams and our website and everything else. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, help us grow this channel, help us grow our impact with this channel. The more people that come here and watch this, and the more people that are able to donate, the more people that are able to spread the awareness, the better off I think this world would be. And we've done a lot of great things. It's awesome to see. I saw right before, as I was making the stream here tonight, 360 people so far have subscribed to this channel, which is an amazing, amazing thing. That's almost one person for every day that we have been live and been covering things, and it's pretty amazing to see just how much this has grown. It's pretty awesome, and this has been an awesome to be part of this community and to continue doing this work almost a year on now at this point. And with that, of course, the like and subscribes and the shares and everything really does help us out, though. And I would like to get to the point to be able to put a fundraiser on every single stream that we do. And while we have a long ways to go, it'd always be nice to finally get there, and the sooner the better. But as we actually get here and into the news, and before we do, if you have questions and you're joining us live tonight, please feel free to ask them in our live chat. I am watching the live chat, as I am every single night. Hello, everyone, by the way. I hope that you guys will be able to ask questions about this, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. To give you a little bit of a backgrounder on myself, I served in the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I was a corporal with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, and an 0352 anti-tank missileman. I did 2 tours to the Middle East during my time with the Marine Corps. My first time going to the Middle East was between October of 2017 and March of 2018. During that time, I spent about a month and a half in Kuwait as part of the Crisis Response Company before being rotated to participate in Operation Inherent Resolve and spending 4.5 months in the northeastern part of Syria, almost the northwestern, northeastern part of Syria, Deir ez-Zor province and Al-Hasaka provinces, respectively. During that time, I was assisting with casualties and fighting the Islamic State and providing stabilization efforts and deterrence efforts in that region. Came back to the United States, ran an armory for about a year and a half, 2 years, before going back to the Middle East on October of 2019 through March of 2020. That time I spent most of my time in Kuwait as the Javelin team leader for Crisis Response Company, before going to the Baghdad Embassy complex and overseeing all anti-arm operations there, starting on New Year's of 2020 as part of the response to the ongoing attacks on the U.S. Embassy there in Baghdad by over 4,000 protesters and Katiba's Hezbollah militants. I was there for when General al-Soleimani was killed, the Iranian general. And then I rotated back about a month and a half later down to Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea in order to train Saudi Arabian Marines preparing to deploy to Yemen to fight the Houthi rebels as part of the Saudi coalition there. I'm a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine, but I'm also a fully cross-trained rifleman, a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a partially cross-trained radio operator, as well as a CLS, or Combat Lifesaver Certified Marine, meaning I've received additional medical training on top of what most Marines are going to receive, and I assist Navy corpsmen. But I do have real-world experience providing aid to battlefield casualties, mostly, unfortunately, civilians, but a lot of casualties, especially during my time in Syria. And outside of that, I have a lot of interest in other things, in geopolitics, history, human geography, science. All of that really piques my brain, but I'm not an expert in any of them. But it doesn't matter if I'm an expert or not. I always implore that you, as the viewer, please do your own research. And if you would like to have a starting point, our maps, including this one, which is already available, are all available on our website there for you guys, including any associated articles we found during our research that go along with this, or anything that, or of course our source links will be in here too, and you can follow along if you would like, or they are archived clear back to when we started the channel a little bit afterwards, but when we actually start archiving these things and not just using the same map over and over again. But that goes all the way back to early April when we started doing that. But with that, we can now get down and dirty here with the news and see what is going on in the world. And of course, we start off with what is happening here in the country of Ukraine, and quite a few developments there certainly have been over the last 48 hours. We start off with a really big story, one that was developing at the time of our last stream on Wednesday, and that is the missile attacks all throughout the country of Ukraine, and we now know just how devastating those attacks were. That massive missile strike has several quotes that popped up today. Quote, on March 8, the armed forces of Ukraine repelled 110 Russian attacks in the Kupiansky, Lemanivsky, Bakhmutsky, Avdiivsky, and Shakhtarsky directions. In the last 24 hours, the Armed Forces of Ukraine carried out 11 strikes on locations of Russian troops and military equipment, and 1 strike on the position of enemy anti-aircraft missile systems. In addition, Ukrainian missile troops and gunners fired at the command post of the Russian army. We can see that does end up continuing with the repelling of at least 102 Russian attacks on the 9th. But overall, due to yesterday's massive missile strikes on Ukraine, meaning on the 8th, massive missile strikes in Ukraine, 30% of consumers in Kyiv remain without central heating, and that's coming from the press service of the Kyiv City Military Administration. And we do see quite a few things that were actually, quite a few were shot down. 34 cruise missiles were overall shot down, and at least 4 Shahed 136 and 131 drones. Bookham 40 says they actually used hypersonic missiles. It's a good possibility, and we did see a lot of reports of Russian aircraft actually getting into the air, so there's a possibility further strikes could be happening tonight. Further here, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Zaluzhny, we can see here also reporting that. The 34 cruise missiles and 4 UAVs. The Russians reporting that they launched over 80 missiles, roughly 81 to 82 missiles yesterday. This is a shoot down of one of those cruise missiles. Quite the detonation indeed. But unfortunately, there were a lot that hit their targets. Oh, I just clicked on that. We see the remnants of some of these. This is coming out of near Pryluki in the Chernihiv Oblast. And the remnants of one of those, which was shot down. Unfortunately, it did cause a lot of damage. A lot of them did end up hitting their targets, or I say targets. We're talking about civilians here. And many of them landed in residential areas. Look at the size of this crater. When it comes to explosions, explosives usually are an up and out kind of thing. Usually it's very difficult unless you have purpose-built shape charges to actually make a giant crater like this. So explosions go up and out and away from the ground usually, meaning that most of the time the ground only has a minimal amount of effect. So this really, when you're seeing large craters like this should tell you just the extent, the amount of explosive power that these missiles are going to have. It is extremely difficult unless you're using purpose-built cratering charges to actually do this kind of damage. You see just absolute destruction, mostly homes, of course. Unfortunately, a lot of casualties were reported. This is some drone footage here. You can see entire just residential blocks just leveled. And once again, these are not a military, this is not a military target. This is a civilian home. Bookham 40 says, so I haven't heard of the results for this attack. Some casualties. Any infrastructure? Yes, we do know that there was extensive damage to infrastructure targets. We can actually see here, this is in the Halazivsky district this is in around Kyiv. Of course, we can get some more up-close photos here. Some of these photos will repeat just because it's multiple government agencies and some of them are posting the same things. But we get different perspectives as well within these photo reels, so I apologize if you're seeing the same photo over and over again. Once again, really good illustration to just the amount of damage that these are going to cause. Absolutely devastating as a weapon system. This is a dog. This is in the Zolochiv area of Lviv. This dog, both of its owners were killed in the blast. This dog is the only survivor of the blast in their home, and this puppy was found. It's injured as a result of the strike, but it was found alive and was found limping around on 3 legs trying to find its owners, and also was like sleeping on top of the rubble. Much like Crim that we saw earlier in the war, that became a symbol for the loss of civilian life throughout this. The United Nations also talking about this. Another sleepless night and a wave of deadly strikes across Ukraine. Civilians are not a target. And keep in mind, most of what we are seeing here, unfortunately, is a lot of civilian casualties and destruction to civilian infrastructure. Once again, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine posting photos that we've already seen, but also following up with this. Fortunately, this also brings us to the somber topic of talking about child casualties. Quite an extensive number, and that number does unfortunately continue to climb. Quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 464 Ukrainian children have died, 931 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region. That is coming from the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine. We can see that coming out on this statistic sheet that they released. This is covering from March the 3rd through the 10th. And they said that so far 73,502 war crimes have thus far been recorded, with an additional 16,909 crimes against humanity. On top of that, we get that reiteration of the 464 children having been killed, and an increase of 3, with an additional 934 children having been injured, with an increase of 4. Keep in mind, this is not a complete list. This is what Ukrainian government has confirmed. The UN will then further confirm that later. But even they have stated with a, being listed as, without full consideration of places under hostile activity. we take a look here and we see attacks on medical centers throughout Ukraine. This is confirmed by the World Health Organization, or WHO. Quote, the World Health Organization, WHO, has a verified 833 attacks on healthcare in Ukraine since 24 February 2022. These attacks caused 101 deaths and 136 injuries. Once again, getting that statistic from the World Health Organization in Ukraine via their official Twitter. Another bit of somber news is that the funeral was held for Dimitro da Vinci Casabello. And so this is a very well-known field commander there in Ukraine. Not someone that I personally have been following, but he is a very well-known field commander there in Ukraine. He was commander of the Da Vinci Wolves Battalion, which is the 67th Mechanized Brigade. And he was actually the youngest hero of Ukraine. He was one of the first heroes of Ukraine in 2014 and 2015 when he was awarded that. He was killed in Bakhmut on March the 7th. So far, hundreds of people, including President Zelensky, the Prime Minister from Finland, Sanna Marin, as well as, of course, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, General Valery Zaluzhny, and Alexei Reznikov was present. Pretty much anyone and everyone was present for this funeral. Unfortunately, once again, a very well-renowned, very courageous Ukrainian who's been fighting there on the front lines for years now, since the beginning, when he was 18, was killed in action. You see just the hundreds of people who gathered for his funeral. Once again, yet another somber day in Kyiv. That immediately brings us over here and into the front lines within the Donetsk region. We start off our night here in the Donetsk region with, of course, the latest daily Donetsk update from Pavel Kolenko, who is the head of the Donetsk Regional Military Administration. And he said, quote, on March 9th, the number of victims of the Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 1 killed, 2 injured. And we do get this from his graphic, which was released at 8 a.m. local time this morning, both in Ukrainian and in English. So far, since February the 24th of 2022, civilian casualties currently number 1,403 people which have been killed within the Donetsk region, with an additional 3,144 whom have been injured. And so far, those injuries, the latest, come from Kostanivka, Avdiivka, and unfortunately the death there in Vovchenka. This does not include areas that are currently under occupation, such as Volnovakha, the city of Donetsk, which has been occupied for years at this point, as well as the city of Mariupol, where through Maxar satellite imagery alone, we can identify tens of thousands of people have been died. And once that area is liberated, we will have more than likely much better numbers, though likely not exact. The city of Kostanivka did suffer under some pretty intense shelling over the last 24 hours. Quote, on March 10th, Russian aggressors shelled the city of Kostanivka in the Donetsk region. About 14 private houses, 9 cars, a gas pipeline, garages, outbuildings, and other civil infrastructure objects were damaged or destroyed. 8 local citizens were injured. That is coming from the Prosecutor General's office. Also reporting on this is also Pavel Kolenko once again. We do see some of the damage here. They did release photos. Lots of private infrastructure, lots of private houses were hit, damaged mostly to exterior windows and other exterior objects. Walking our way towards Bakhmut here, Chasiv Yar ended up receiving an aid shipment coming from the United Nations. This aid will be providing bottled water, food, medicine, and other basic necessities to help at least 2,000 people which are living in the city, as well as displaced individuals from the city of Bakhmut who are trying to flee. Just a short clip there from the UN. To the northwest of Bakhmut, we see that the Russian Wagner group is making at least some advances in their offensive here. This is the village of Dubova Vasilivka, which appears to at least have been have Russian forces reach the outskirts of this small area. They did end up reaching the settlement, and they did end up taking photos and videos. Like most of the time, this does indicate that Ukrainian forces no longer are in control of the village and that it has been occupied.
Сегодня, 8 марта, мы, ЧВК «Вагнер», полностью освободили населенный пункт Дуба-Васильевку и поздравляем всех женщин с праздником!
So that is happening as Russian forces continue to attempt to completely encircle Ukrainian troops in the city of Bakhmut, trying to completely cut them off, encircle them, and then basically whittle them down. But tonight's top story comes from the city of Bakhmut. And that is where tonight's line comes from. As Russian forces take the eastern sector of the city and continue their attempt at encirclement of the Battle of Bakhmut, which has now been ongoing for nearly 10 continuous months, somehow has intensified even more in the last 48 hours. Ukrainian reinforcements are currently pouring into the city as Russian troops are throwing themselves at Ukrainian forces in brutal fighting, often at close quarters. The ferocity of the fighting has grown to the point many are currently comparing it to the battle for Mariupol in its destructive scope and brutality. Such horrific fighting is ongoing that Ukrainian defenders have given it a very simple nickname: Hell. Maxar satellite footage has allowed us to view the city from above, only to find ruins and rubble where a thriving city of thousands once stood. Continual indiscriminate bombardments have left it a wasteland, and almost unfathomable how it's almost unfathomable how human life continues in such horrendous conditions. Civilians, at least those who refuse to or cannot evacuate, somehow are still surviving in these dark and cold cellars that are using as bomb shelters. It's too dangerous to go outside and leave. The only idea of what is happening is when Ukrainian troops stop by to give them what's food they can spare, and from the sounds of explosions around them. This is the scorched earth policy when it comes to the Russians at its finest. Take a look. This is just one area around Bakhmut. This was in August. This is the 1st of August. So the battle for Bakhmut had been raging in this sector for almost 2 continuous months, at the point that the top photo was taken in August. That last photo there shows you just in January what the situation was. It's pot-marked with shell craters for as far as the eye can see. This situation around Bakhmut, the whole fighting around Bakhmut, is much more reminiscent of that of the First World War than really anything you could possibly compare it to otherwise. I mean, even in World War II, the type of fighting that has been taking place here is significantly, it's very much reminiscent of World War I, much more than I would think World War II. This is the Maxar satellite footage that we were talking about. And you see this is some of the latest Maxar. This is from March the 6th. And you see the amount of destruction of the city. This is something that we really usually don't get. You can see, all of these buildings having been completely destroyed or damaged or currently on fire, such as this one here on the corner. And you see all of the destroyed bridges. Once again, pot marked with shell craters. And you see just all of these shell craters which have landed all around. And keep in mind, this is a city. Indiscriminate bombardment is actually under the 1949 Geneva Conventions, specifically the Additional Protocol 1, which was adopted in 1977, is banned by the Geneva Conventions because even civilian infrastructure, houses, homes, churches, schools, hospitals, all these things are protected under the Geneva Convention, whether there are actually people present or not. Unless it is being used for a military purpose, it is therefore a war crime. And to do it systematically, as we've seen being over and over and over again. When you look at places such as Marinka, Bakhmut, Severodonetsk, Mariupol, when it becomes a tactic, it becomes systematic. That is then considered a crime against humanity under the 1993 Rome Statute. a famous MiG-17 monument that we've been using, that many people have been using to identify, hey, Ukrainian forces are still moving into the city of Bakhmut. They still have a way in and out. Has been destroyed. This is in the western entrance of the city of Bakhmut. So you can see that is the MiG-17 monument. It looks like it finally was hit and is now completely destroyed. Many people are already saying, hopefully, a F-16 monument will go up in its place. There are reports from Ukrainian troops that the Wagner soldiers have broken through to the Azov plant in Bakhmut. And this is in the northern industrial sector here. I'll give you an idea. So we have updated the map accordingly. And what we're seeing is that they're currently working on expelling Russian forces from that area to try and shore up their defensive lines within the city. As this industrial sectors usually end up being very key strongholds for Ukrainian troops. And so far, the quote today regarding what the main line, the main title for tonight, actually comes from the fighting in this area from a Ukrainian soldier who said, quote, "This is probably worse than Stalingrad." So we'll go ahead and pull this one up here.
Доброго дня, 9.03. Що по ситуації?
I apologize, it's not wanting to actually pull up that video to be able to show you guys.
Доброго дня, 9.03. Що по ситуации в Бахмуте? Пидоры зашли уже в промку. Стараемся сейчас их выбить. Они закрепились сегодня ночью. Моя разведгруппа зашла сегодня с утра и пытаемся штурмовать их позиции. Дай бог получится, чтобы вы понимали оборот этой трагедии. Это хуже, чем, наверное, Сталинград. Это вот эти заводы, это промки такие. Это промышленные зоны, которые все уже уничтожены.
One bad thing about vid translators, it does not exactly appreciate me trying to improve that for you guys. So I apologize for a little bit of jumping around, but it is what it is. I want you guys to actually see what we're talking about here. We do have quite a lot of videos. We won't go through them all tonight just because there's so many of them. But there are quite a lot of videos coming out from the city of Bakhmut and the fighting that's currently ongoing there.
Ебашить, суки, пидорасы. Ёбаные, сука.
Welcome to the hell in the Bakhmut. Евакуація. Так, як ми не хочемо звідси їхати. Як ми тут привикли. Курва мать. А так да.
We see this as part of the reinforcement groups that are currently on their way into Bakhmut. It's one we've already covered.
Проїхав переправу і тут розбили. Башня відірвана.
Ебать, Илюсю. Сука, русский мир, блядь. Всім привіт, мене все добре. Ми працюємо. Все хорошо. 20 метрів підари. Один уже лежить.
Це є 0. Це є Кузьміч. Це є я. Зараз покажу, де підари вже. Ось тільки що по мені оттуда, блін, десь лівіше трошки стріляв. Там хати пішли, село, а тут рівок, канава йде. І вони за той канавик на нас пуляють.
And so that is kind of the situation there in Bakhmut. And the fighting is getting rather brutal there as we continue to see the partial encirclement of the city, but also as the Russians continue to try and push into the city. Book of 40 says, so how are the Russians going to take this city? They're reduced to light infantry. Shakes head. Russia has one tank factory operating, and stocks are running low. Stocks aren't necessarily running low for the Russians, but stocks of more modern vehicles are. We're seeing a lot more deployment of the T-62s entering into the battle space, which is, you know, they have some minor modernizations, mostly in their optics for the commander, but other than that, not an extensive amount of upgrades being done to these systems, and but there's still a large quantity of them. And at this point in the war, a tank is a tank, and the Russians kind of realize this, which is why they are okay with deploying the T-62. Not just because their stocks are running low, but because if a $100,000 missile can destroy a $4 million tank, then why send the $4 million tank? And that's kind of the thing. So at this point, they're just sending whatever they can to get more equipment into that battle space, kind of going for a quantity over quality kind of mentality there, but it's still working to their detriment as they're not making incredible gains and they're taking extensive amounts of losses. Xenocide 21 coming in with that very famous quote, all your base belong to us. Yeah, like naval mounts on a 1950 APC. Yeah, the APC I think is actually younger. I did hear about the T-34s from Laos, T-34-85 specifically, that were on lease to them. Trevor Diggs is unhappy with the title because the entirety of Stalingrad was larger than the war, than the entirety of this war. He says by times 5. Actually, the Battle of Stalingrad is about double the size of the entirety of the war if you're considering battlefield numbers on what is being deployed. And looking at Adam Welkin says Germany has no factories even able to be converted to tank building. Their manufacturing is under contract with Belgium. Part of their contract is being done through Belgium, but the Leopard 2, specifically all variants of the Leopard 2, are actually produced in Germany. And even most of the main battle tank, most of the main tank guns for, South Korea's main battle tank, the Black Panther, of course, the one for the Abrams tank is produced in Germany. It's all made by Rheinmetall Arms, which produces the 120 millimeter main tank gun for most modern NATO tanks and NATO aligned countries' tanks. So, but they are a German production. That's why you can't just ship them. It's a German domestic production. And so we continue on here with the news. We actually jump over here into Enhadar, which is the location of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is where this next story is coming from. Due to the large-scale missile strikes, it would appear that all power to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has been cut once again. Quote, this is the 6th time, let me say it again, 6th time that ZNPP has lost all off-site power and has to operate in emergency mode. How can we sit here in this room this morning and allow this to happen? This cannot go on. That is coming from Rafael Mariano Grossi, who is the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which does have a permanent team there.
I want to report that this morning at around 5 a.m. local time, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant lost all off-site power when its last remaining 750 kilovolt line was disconnected. Its only remaining backup 330 kilovolt line having been damaged a few days ago and under repair. As a result, all 20 of the site's emergency diesel generators were activated. The site's essential power is now being provided by 8 of those diesels, with the rest now in standby mode. And there is enough diesel on site for 15 days of operation. The 2 out of 6 units that were in hot shutdown are moving to cold shutdown. This is the first time the site has lost all power since 23rd November 2022 and follows reports of missile strikes across Ukraine overnight. Our ISAM teams on all the other NPPs in Ukraine have reported back to us this morning. At South Ukraine NPP, there are reported losses of power lines, but there are sufficient remaining available to provide off-site power if required. The other operating NPPs, Hmelnytsky and Rivne, have not been directly affected, though the plants have been managing power levels in accordance with grid requirements. Similarly, there are no reports of Chernobyl NPP being affected. However, yet again, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is running on emergency diesels. The last line of defense.
And that is the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi. In the city of Kherson, at least 3 people were killed after Russian forces shelled the city itself, striking a public transit location. Quote, on the morning of March 9th, Russian occupiers shelled a public transport stop and nearby shop in Kherson, killing 3 people were killed. And that's coming from Andriy Yermak, the head of the presidential office. This was further reported by the National Police of Ukraine, who did take this photo of that strike. There is an additional photo, which we have added here, that unfortunately, though, the bodies at that point had not been removed. It was an immediate aftermath photograph as first responders were on scene, and so we deem that to be 18 plus. Coming from Back in Alive, a nonprofit organization actually listed in our description. But that is everything inside of the country of Ukraine. But that's not everything that has to deal with Ukraine itself or any of the news coming out from elsewhere around the world. Of course, the first thing we do is we jump over here and into Russia, where we see that there's a rather desperation for fresh cannon fodder, which has increased. The Wagner Private Military Corporation, or PMC, owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, has announced the opening of the PMC Wagner recruiting centers in 42 Russian cities. A new video, Prigozhin has said that after the capture of Bakhmut, he intends to reboot the Wagner PMC in order to turn it into an army with an ideology, quote-unquote. Now, keep in mind, the Wagner Private Military Corporation have currently been recruiting from prisons with people that don't have necessarily too much of another choice. Their tactics have been brutal, and they've been currently the ones spearheading what is happening there in the Donetsk Oblast, as the Russian forces are more focused on areas such as Vitove and Kreminna and the Luhansk areas, as well as suffering from severe manpower shortages. Clear across Russia, we come to the other side of the country. This is in Vladivostok, where we see that reportedly an Su-27 flanker has been damaged by partisans this far east. And we do see them actually releasing a video today of lighting that jet on fire. You can go ahead and take a look at this. Unfortunately, this does have copyright music, so we'll have to cut that out here, but you can see as they light that fire and set off some fuel leading up into the aircraft. So, a very interesting video indeed, and just tells you just kind of how poor the security is around Vladivostok. Now, I will say one thing. If you look at this angle of the city, one thing I noticed, just like a personal observation here, this city looks like a slick of oil in water. Like I've been covering this stuff for a long time, and I just see things from around the world, and I'm used to seeing this. I thought that Google was messing up when I saw this. But no, this is how the city actually is. Like, it's actually designed like this. It looks like melting ice cream or like an oil slick in water. It's so weird. It's trippy. Also, this city, interestingly enough, has like 20 separate forts around it, which also is an interesting thing to me. But moving on, we continue over here. We actually come up here and into the Baltic Sea, where the mystery around the Nord Stream blast does continue. After last week's anonymous U.S. official report that pro-Ukrainian group is responsible for the explosion, more details come out of a second suspicious vessel. A Russian-linked Greek tanker, Minerva Julie, stayed there, alternately idling and crossing a roughly 200 square nautical mile area above the 2 natural gas pipelines for 7 days. German investigators think it was involved in the sabotage. Statement from Minerva regarding Minerva Julie's 8-day stopover on Nord Stream explosion locations. Quote, Minerva Julie was awaiting her next voyage instructions. This does happen. While this does happen, it is quite a coincidence and that looking at a year of AIS data as the only instance of such a pause in the vessel's schedule. Now, I'm not going to say that's suspicious. But That's really weird. That's an oddly specific place to park a vessel. That's a very oddly specific path to take for said vessel. There's a full investigation for thread by that individual, Oliver Alexander, as well as a Business Insider report. In Hamburg, Germany, at least 7 people were killed in a shooting at a Jehovah's Witness center. 7 people were killed and at least 20 injured during a mass shooting on Thursday at the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall in the German city of Hamburg. The city's police said that in their latest statement, 8 people are dead, including the alleged perpetrator. The attack occurred around 9 p.m. local time, 3 p.m. Eastern time, with police initially unsure how many shooters might be involved. Updates from the city's police force suggested there was just one attacker who is believed to have died at the scene. But most of the crime are not yet known, but the police found no signs of the attacker escaping from the scene of the shooting. And we do have, of course, here the latest update from the Hamburg police. Saying that there is a large police operation in Osterdorf. We're currently examining the background. We'll provide more information here shortly. Hungary appears to be changing directions politically. Orban has decided that changing course might be the best route for the country. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is rethinking his relationship with Russia. Quote, I understand we need to rebuild Russian-European relations after the war, but that's far from realistic, Orban said. That's why Hungary's foreign and economic policy need to think hard about what sort of relations we can establish and maintain with Russia in the next 10 to 15 years. If you would like some more information on kind of that political shift inside of Hungary, something rather monumental in the last year or so, I recommend checking out the Bloomberg report, which we've also attached. The protests in Georgia continue for their 3rd day in a row. Tens of thousands of protesters have returned to the streets of the Georgian capital for the 3rd straight day of demonstrations, despite the ruling Georgian Dream Party's pledge to withdraw from the controversial foreign agents legislation from Parliament. In the face of the protests and sharp criticism from the West, Georgian Dream announced in a statement that on its website early on March 9th that it would kill the legislation, saying, as a party of government responsible to every member of society, we decided to unconditionally withdraw this bill that we supported. Protests resumed that evening, with participants calling on the government to formally denounce the bill and to release all those detained. The Interior Ministry said Friday it had freed all 133. You can see once again just the size and scope of these protests. They are quite large. Tens of thousands of people gathered in front of the Parliament building. However, the Russian government is now threatening those in Georgia over the protests. A very interesting turn of events on at least social media. From the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Crimea, an area which they occupied, saying protests against foreign agents bill erupted in Tbilisi result in demands for recognition of the government. We recommend to the Georgian people to recall a similar situation in Ukraine in 2014 and what it finally led to. #think twice. If that isn't a threat by a country that has already invaded Georgia in 2008 and then following also invaded Ukraine in 2014, followed with an additional invasion last year, I don't know what is. That is, then as we can see in this first photo, that is the Maidan Revolution, and of course what we see here in Tbilisi. allows us to move here in south and into the Middle East, and we come up into Tel Aviv here in Israel, where Hamas militants ended up attacking Israeli citizens. A Palestinian is reported attacking Israelis in Tel Aviv, the capital of Israel. During the skirmish, 3 citizens were injured. One is currently in critical condition. The attacker was neutralized by return gunfire. The shooter who attacked the crowd in Tel Aviv has been identified as Mutas Kawaji, who is a Hamas militant. At the moment, it is known of 5 victims in the attack, including Kawaji himself, who was killed. You can see, of course, some screenshots of CCTV camera footage, and that is the individual himself. This comes up as tensions continue to flare between Israel and Palestine, so the worst that we've seen in years. Afghanistan has had several incidents over the last 48 hours. In Mazar-e-Sharif, explosion has killed the governor and his subordinates. Yesterday morning in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif, an explosion occurred near the administrative building in the Balkh province, which is as a result of which the governor, Mullah Dud Muzammel, and several of his subordinates were killed, and several others, including the Taliban director of radio and television, Ahmadullah Wasik, were injured. The deceased governor was known for actively fighting the Islamic State militants during a joint campaign with the United States against Islamists in the province of Nangarhar and the east of the country. We do continue to see, of course, some photos of the situation there. The Taliban-linked sources released video footage of the security cameras in the Balkh provincial government building. They show the suicide bomber freely enters the building and goes to his target. The explosion itself was not shown.
كاميرا خرابه سيده كانوا يوزع بوت على الشمع داستا غبلتي ستالي كول كاميرا كتلیا وای وزع د دغه
ليس سره جوړه ده مغه کاميرا جوړه به اچھا مولوی صاحب سره شته ده
تیرا پریدا شانه
So that's the Taliban analyzing that video footage. And looks like we can see, yep, there is the suicide bomber as he just walks in. The Islamic State did end up claiming responsibility for the attack on the governor in the Balkh province. The text of the statement gives details of the attack, and so it turns out that a suicide bomber named Abdul Haq Khurasani lived near the governor's administration building and walked to it, after which he waited for Mullah Dud Muzammel to in the hall. Having met the target, the suicide bomber set off his mined belt. According to local sources, 15 security officials were killed along with the official. There is the official Islamic State, or ISIS-K, photo of him. Meanwhile, in Kabul, an Afghan resistance did end up blowing up a Taliban checkpoint with an IED. This is in the 5th district of Kabul. According to them, 3 were killed and the same number of security officials were injured. In turn, the Taliban habitually stated that only 2 people were injured as a result of the incident. Once again, the Taliban usually is going to downplay these situations. So unfortunately, we're still seeing a lot of instability there in the country of Afghanistan. Coming out of Beijing, China's President Xi Jinping has been reelected for a 3rd 5-year term. I say reelected with very large quotation marks. Chinese President Xi Jinping was reelected for a 3rd 5-year term Friday by the 14th National People's Congress. The election makes Xi the longest-serving leader in the People's Republic since its founding in 1949, and only the 2nd leader to serve more than 2 terms since Mao Zedong himself. Previously, the Chinese constitution forbade the same person to lead the country for more than 2 terms. However, in 2018, China's basic law was amended, and now the number of terms is currently unlimited. 2,952 delegates reportedly unanimously voted for Xi. Much like other countries in the world, please do not be the first one to stop clapping. Irva says that my pronunciation of Xi Jinping's name is pretty much near perfect. Wow. That's a first on this channel. I usually butcher this horrendously. That's impressive, not gonna lie. Thank you, Irvis. That's the first time I think that's ever going to happen. I think that's the first and the last time that's ever going to happen. Coming out of Somalia, something a little bit less laughable there. 89 army personnel were killed by al-Shabaab militants as the brutal fighting in Somalia does continue. Al-Shabaab militants claim the killing of 89 Jubaland army personnel during an assault and capture of the military base at Janai Abduli region. After capturing the base along with equipment, weapons, and ammunition, the jihadists set fire to part of the military facility. So it's Xi Jinping. Say Xi. If it's Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping. Okay. Awesome. And you can see the different attacks there on the base itself, released in sets of photographs. Jumping over into the Democratic Republic of the Congo, at least 40 people were killed due to an attack by the rebels, supposedly, initially. So more than 40 people were killed, and several more were injured in an attack reportedly by ADF rebels in the village of Mukondi in the Beni territory of the North Kivu province. Attacks of the armed groups and intercommunal violence have threatened populations in the east of the province of the DRC for nearly 30 years now. More than 120 groups operate in the region, and a dramatic resurgence of attacks against civilians has been reported over the last few months. Armed clashes have triggered a massive and repeated population displacement. Over 5.8 million people are displaced in the country, making it the largest displaced population in Africa. Internally displaced people, or IDPs, face extreme harsh living conditions with a lack of shelter, water and sanitation, food, and poor health conditions. The EU has activated a humanitarian air badge, or HAB, in a Team Europe approach with France in a collaboration with humanitarian partners to deliver emergency items to cover the immediate needs of the most vulnerable. The first flight is landing today in Goma. Coming from ADF Magazine. But in all, the Islamic State actually is the one who took responsibility for the attack at the village of Mukondi in the road between Beni and Butembo. According to the Islamists, the target was the meeting of local Christians, which was attacked with small arms and edged weapons. As a result, at least 35 people were killed, and several more fell into the hands of the attackers. Authorities are currently once again confirming the deaths of 44 people. And there is the official statement from the Islamic State claiming a responsibility. In South Sudan, a cholera outbreak has begun. The cholera outbreak in Malacca from the Upper Nile state on March 7th. A total of 179 so far cholera cases, including the one death, have been reported since February the 22nd of this year. 170, or 95% of the 179 cases, were reported in children ages 0 to 4. So once again, we continue to see very infectious diseases popping up here in Africa. That is all coming from the Ministry of Health of South Sudan, who is declaring it an outbreak. We jump across the Atlantic here, and we end up here just south of the border in Matamoros here in Mexico, where a drug lord has given up those responsible for the deaths of 2 Americans, which were kidnapped. The Mexican drug cartel has given away 5 of their bandits who attacked U.S. citizens in the state of Matamoros in northern Mexico. The incident occurred on March 3rd, where the bandits killed 2 citizens and kidnapped 2 additional. Later, they were released, and now the head of the drug cartel has apologized to Washington in writing and handed over the criminals to the authorities. And there they are. Very interesting. This isn't something you normally get out of the cartels. They're usually not so keen to do these things, but it's definitely a very interesting move made by the cartel leader there. In California, coming out of Silicon Valley, the largest bank since 2008 has gone under. California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation closed the Silicon Valley Bank after its stock sputtered on Friday, signaling that the bank has failed. The failure of Silicon Valley Bank can result in shutting down of thousands of tech startups, as, quote, nearly half of all U.S. venture capital-backed startups were involved with Silicon Valley Bank, per a Bloomberg report. Silicon Valley Bank was the 20th largest bank in the United States. For example, the Roku stock is now down after saying that 26% of its cash and cash equivalents were held in the CVB, and, quote, does not know to what extent the company will be able to recover its cash on deposit at SVB. And that's coming from CNBC. Interestingly, Silicon Valley's bank CEO, CFO, and CMO sold $4.4 million in stock over the last 2 weeks. So it's coming from an SVB branch there in Menlo Park. So this is the first time since 2008 that we've seen a bank collapse, a large bank collapse. We're going to jump up here and into the Northwest, where we see something, we need a call to action at this point, and it's to stop the Willow Project. So the Biden administration is expected to make a decision soon on whether to approve the controversial Willow Project in Alaska. Now, what is the Willow Project? And that's where ConocoPhillips' proposed Willow Project is a massive and decades-long oil drilling venture in Alaska's North Slope in the National Petroleum Reserve, which is owned by the federal government. The area where the project is planned holds about 600 million barrels of oil. That oil would take years to reach the market since the project has yet to be constructed. If permitted, ConocoPhillips massive Willow oil project would pollute and destroy air, water, and lands with long-term damage and damaging outcomes to food security, traditional activities, social culture systems, public health in the Arctic communities. And the Willow project poses an immediate threat to local food sources, specifically caribou herds that directly feed the Arctic Alaskan communities. The Teshekpuk caribou herd, an important food source, remains in the Arctic year-round, and the constant exposure to the oil industry disruption and habitat degradation is already deflecting and delaying their movements, causing the indigenous communities that have to face a decline in the caribou populations, but also now have to venture further out to hunt them. You see here from the NRDC. If you would like some more information, there is a website called stopwillow.org. Couple of things coming out of Washington, D.C. There are more sanctions on China. The United States has imposed sanctions on 5 companies and 1 person in China who are said to be involved in supplying Iran with aerospace components that could be used to produce the Shahed-136 attack drones. The U.S. Department of the Treasury has so far reported this is because they are selling those Shaheds, therefore, to the Russians to be used in the war in Ukraine. Devastating future for indigenous communities could be happening very soon, as the Indian Child Welfare Act, or the ICWA, was enacted in 1978 in response to a crisis affecting American Indian and Alaska Native children, families, and tribes. Studies revealed that large numbers of Native children were being separated from their parents, extended families, and communities by state child welfare and private adoption agencies. In fact, research found that 25 to 35% of all Native children were being removed. Of these, 85% were placed outside of families and communities, even when fit and willing relatives were available. In the November 2022 hearing, the ICWA was critiqued and scrutinized by a couple who attempted to adopt an indigenous child, but did so unsuccessfully. The young girl now lives in her tribal community and is learning her culture. This discussion comes at a time where, in recent years, the extent of abuse that occurred to Indian boarding schools is becoming more apparent, as well as the intergenerational impacts and traumas from that time. The Supreme Court is expected to reach a decision regarding ICWA by June 2023, and it is not certain that they will uphold this act, which means that Native American communities could face further scrutiny. Ultimately, if the Supreme Court makes the decision to overturn ICWA, states would regain the control to remove Native children from their families, and this would put the overall existence and longevity of tribes at risk. It is vital to continue to support ICWA and to take action against possible overturning of this protection for indigenous communities. If you'd like some more on that, you can see that there is a NICWA.org regarding that about ICWA, or the ICWA, as well as the Circling Eagle Law Office. Fortunately, our final story of the night comes from Niagara Falls, and it is a sad story. But coming from Niagara Falls, the world's loneliest orca has died in captivity. After spending 40 years in captivity and 10 years in solitary confinement in a small tank, Kiska, the last orca in marine land, has died. Kiska was believed to be 47 years old and was captured in Icelandic waters in 1979 when she was 3 years old. She was captured alongside Keiko, who became famous in the movie Free Willy, and the pair ended up living together for a few years in Marineland in the 1980s. Sadly, she had outlived all of her calves as well. And she had outlived all of her calves as well, as none of them ended up surviving in captivity. Despite hundreds of petitions to get her released, her fate was determined to be one of misery. She spent her final years floating listlessly or banging her head against the tank walls that she was confined in. Thankfully, because of the suffering that she went through and the confinement and the backlash as a result, this has caused a wave of reforms inside of Canada over the last several years, making Kiska the last orca to live in captivity in Canada. It is illegal for any further orcas to be brought into captivity in the nation of Canada. And that is Kiska in her tank. If you'd like some more information on that, you can go to globalnews.ca. But that is everything that we have from our sources coming from throughout the world. So I hope that you guys may have learned something tonight about what have you, whether it be the war in Ukraine, whether it be by keeping orcas in contained confined spaces by themselves being, of course, animal that requires a community to be in is a bad idea. Or, the fact that you probably shouldn't allow for, the further destruction of native cultures, considering we had 200 years of manifest destiny doing that. I hope that you learned something regardless. I hope that you guys continue to learn things from these streams. I hope that you continue to support the organizations trying to help people in these streams as we continue to go forward. And I hope that we can continue to see this channel grow so that way I can put fundraisers on every single stream that we do. But with that, I hope that you guys, that your family and your friends are safe. Hope that you are safe, and if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. And I hope to see you guys back here actually on Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central, for another at that point 72 hours of news and review as we continue to take a look around the globe at what is happening for us. And so my name is Paul from the New News. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I hope to see you back here on Monday night. Alrighty, bye now.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуємо. Тут для них нема нічого, крім труни. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом, даже танки не почем. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkled bum. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стріляє до волновахи, і чудно кличе діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Gone home, Russian soldiers, gone home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи чутно клич, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО.